On the faraway planet of Varonis, in a galaxy filled with powerful and ancient civilizations, there lived an alien woman named Zenaka. She was known across the stars as one of the wealthiest and most influential beings in the galaxy. With her shimmering silver skin and eyes that glowed like twin moons, she was admired by many. Her beauty was unmatched, and her mind, sharp as a blade, had built an empire that stretched across many star systems. Yet despite all her wealth and power, there was one thing that Zenaka lacked: a partner, a true companion who could understand her on a deeper level. For centuries, she had been surrounded by admirers and suitors from countless alien races, each trying to win her favor with extravagant gifts, promises of power, and empty words of admiration. But Zenaka was not interested in these displays. She had seen it all. She had been to countless galas, attended numerous banquets, and entertained all manner of beings. Yet none had ever touched her heart. None had been able to challenge her, inspire her, or truly connect with her in the way she longed for. It was on one such evening, as she sat in her grand palace overlooking the sparkling city of Varonis, that she received an unexpected invitation. It was from a human diplomat, someone she had heard of but never met. His name was Riley Thorne. The invitation was simple, yet it carried weight. It invited Zenaka to an exclusive gala on Earth, a human colony that was still young in the grand scheme of the galaxy but growing rapidly. The invitation spoke of something she could not ignore. Experience the resilience of humanity firsthand. Zenaka had heard stories about humans, stories that ranged from their determination to survive to their uncanny ability to adapt and overcome even the harshest challenges. But despite all the tales, she remained curious. Humans were known for their unpredictability, their wild ambition, and their tenacity. Zenaka wondered what a human diplomat could possibly offer her, especially when it came to matters of the heart. The night before her departure, Zenaka paced in her grand hall. She stared at her reflection in the polished surface of a mirror. She could see the years of political maneuvering and high-status events in her eyes, but what she couldn't see was any real connection with another being. Her thoughts were interrupted when a message from Riley Thorne came through on her comm device. "Zenaka, I hope you accept my invitation." The message read, "I believe you will find your visit to Earth enlightening." Intrigued, she made up her mind. Earth, the human colony. She would go. The next day, Zenaka arrived on Earth, stepping out of a sleek transport craft that hovered silently in the atmosphere. She looked down at the city below, an eclectic mix of old and new, with towering skyscrapers next to humble homes. The city was alive, bustling with energy. She couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity bubbling inside her. What was it about humans that made them so resilient? What was it about them that others, beings far older and far more powerful, could not understand? Riley Thorne was waiting for her as she descended from the transport. He was standing alone on the steps of the event hall, his figure somewhat out of place among the crowd of elegantly dressed aliens and humans. But as Zenaka stepped closer, she noticed something about him. He had no legs. At first, Zenaka couldn't understand. The human, despite his injury, was standing tall, his posture straight, and his gaze focused. He wasn't using a cane or crutches. Instead, he had a sleek, high-tech device beneath him, a levitating platform that allowed him to move freely, almost as if he were floating. She couldn't deny the odd feeling of admiration that stirred within her. He had been in some kind of accident, she realized. And yet, here he was, not only surviving but thriving. Riley Thorne was the last person she expected to meet at such an event. And yet, his presence was magnetic. She could see it in the way others looked at him, not with pity, but with respect. They weren't focused on what he lacked. They were focused on what he had. A mind sharp enough to navigate the complexities of diplomacy, a spirit strong enough to conquer any obstacle, and a presence that demanded attention. Zenaka, still stunned by the sight of him, walked toward him. As she approached, he offered a warm smile, his dark eyes glinting with something that seemed to challenge her, perhaps even something like amusement. He didn't seem intimidated by her wealth or power. He didn't seem to care about the alien races surrounding them. "Welcome to Earth, Zenaka," Riley said, his voice steady and calm. "I trust you'll find this visit interesting." There was something about the way he spoke, so confident and yet unassuming, that caught her off guard. She had heard humans were bold, but this human, was unlike any she had ever met. And for the first time in years, Zenaka felt a spark of genuine curiosity. "Thank you for the invitation, Riley Thorne," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "I look forward to seeing what your world has to offer." Riley's smile deepened. "I think you'll find that it's not just the world you'll be interested in, Zenaka. It's the humans." Zenaka followed Riley Thorne into the grand hall where the gala was being held. The hall was magnificent, filled with beings from all over the galaxy, aliens with shimmering skin, beings made of light, and even some who floated in the air. The air buzzed with conversation, laughter, and music. Yet, despite the dazzling surroundings, Zenaka couldn't help but focus on Riley. He moved with ease, his levitating platform gliding effortlessly across the floor. It was a beautiful piece of technology, sleek, quiet, and graceful. It looked like nothing more than a floating chair, but Zenaka could tell it was much more than that. Riley didn't need legs to move. He had something far more valuable: his willpower. She glanced around the room at the other guests. Many of them were staring at Riley, but their gazes were not filled with sympathy. They watched him with respect, even awe. Zenaka could see why. There was something in the way Riley carried himself. Despite his obvious disability, he didn't let it define him. He didn't shrink away from the gaze of others. Instead, he met their stares with a calm confidence, as if to say, "I am not what you expect." As they reached the center of the hall, Zenaka couldn't help but ask, "How do you move so effortlessly, Riley? I've seen many humans, and none of them seem to have the same." She struggled to find the right word. "Resilience." Riley smiled. It wasn't a smile of pity or sorrow, but one of understanding. "Humans are adaptable," he said simply. "When something goes wrong, we find a way to make it work. It's not just about surviving. It's about thriving, no matter the odds." Zenaka blinked, her mind racing. Thriving, no matter the odds. She had never heard such words from anyone in her life, least of all someone with such a clear disadvantage. "But you must have faced difficulties," she said, genuinely curious. "How did you overcome this loss?" Riley's smile faded slightly, and for a brief moment, his eyes grew distant. "I didn't overcome it right away," he admitted. "At first, I was angry. I didn't want to live like this. But over time, I realized something important. I can't change the past. What happened to me is done. But I can decide what I do next. And that's what matters. Every day, I wake up, and I choose to live. I choose to fight, to push forward, no matter what happens." Zenaka could hear the sincerity in his voice. It was something she hadn't expected from someone in his position. Most beings would have wallowed in self-pity after such a traumatic injury. But Riley, he had taken his loss and turned it into strength. As the evening went on, Zenaka watched Riley interact with other guests. He was easy to talk to, and his wit was sharp. He was both diplomatic and down-to-earth, with the ability to make even the most powerful beings in the room feel at ease. Zenaka noticed that no one looked down on him or treated him with pity. Instead, they respected him for his mind, his strength, and his character. The more Zenaka observed, the more she realized that Riley was not defined by his disability. In fact, it was as though his spirit shone even brighter because of it. Later in the evening, Zenaka found herself alone with Riley on a balcony overlooking the vast city below. The stars twinkled in the sky, and the cool night breeze carried the faint scent of flowers from the garden below. Riley leaned against the railing, his eyes gazing out at the horizon. "You know," he said after a moment of silence, "when I first came to Earth, I was just like you. I thought power and wealth were the things that mattered most. But after my injury, I realized something. Zanaka turned to look at him, intrigued. What did you realize? Riley's gaze softened, and he gave her a small, knowing smile. I realized that it's not the things you have that define you. It's how you respond to what life throws at you. When you lose something, whether it's your legs, your status, or even your hope, you have a choice. You can either give up, or you can fight. I chose to fight, and I've never been stronger because of it. Zanaka sat in silence for a moment, her mind racing. She had always been surrounded by power, but it had always been external power. Power from wealth, power from status, power from the ability to control others. But Riley, he had something else. His power was self-made, born from his own will, from his own refusal to let life break him. It was a power that didn't need to control, didn't need to dominate. It simply was. As they finished their meal, Zanaka found herself lost in thought. She had spent her life chasing power, but now, in the presence of Riley Thorne, she was beginning to question everything she had ever known. What if true strength wasn't about wealth or control? What if it was about something deeper, something more fundamental? What if it was about the willingness to keep going, no matter what? Later that night, Zanaka stood on the balcony of her estate, looking out at the stars. The night was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, Zanaka felt a sense of peace herself. It was as if the universe had opened up to her, revealing something she had never truly understood before. Riley joined her on the balcony, standing beside her, but not saying a word. Zanaka didn't need him to speak. His presence was enough. He didn't try to fix her thoughts or offer easy answers. He simply existed, steady and calm, his quiet strength filling the space between them. "Thank you," Zanaka said softly, her voice full of gratitude, "for showing me the power of just living." Riley didn't answer at first, but then he placed a hand on the railing beside her, his gaze on the stars above. "It's not about living, Zanaka. It's about living fully. And sometimes, the most important thing you can do is just be, to accept who you are and keep moving forward." Zanaka nodded, her heart heavy with the realization that she had been living in a world of illusions. But now, standing beside Riley, she understood. True strength wasn't about what you had. It was about what you could give, how much you were willing to fight, and how much you were willing to grow. And in that moment, Zanaka realized she had found something more valuable than wealth, more powerful than status. She had found a connection, something that had eluded her for so long. The days that followed felt different for Zanaka. The city of Earth, once just another stop in her endless travels, began to feel more real, more alive. She had always seen the world through the lens of power and wealth, but now everything seemed to shift. It wasn't the grand buildings or the high-tech gadgets that held her attention. It was the people. It was Riley. His strength, his resilience, had changed something deep within her. She found herself waking early each morning, her thoughts preoccupied with him. His words from their dinner still echoed in her mind. Strength isn't about what's visible. It's about what's inside. She had always believed that strength came from control, from owning everything around you, from being the one others looked up to. But now she wondered if there was more to it. Zanaka had never allowed herself to be vulnerable. She had built her empire on the backs of others, using her wealth and influence to get what she wanted. But Riley, he didn't need any of that. He didn't need power or influence. All he needed was his will, his ability to keep moving forward, no matter what. One evening, Zanaka invited Riley to a secluded garden on her estate. It was a peaceful place, filled with lush greenery and the soft sound of flowing water. She had asked him to meet her there for a reason. There was something she needed to understand, something that had been bothering her since their first conversation. As Riley arrived, floating quietly on his levitating platform, Zanaka greeted him with a warm smile. But there was something different in her eyes. A challenge, perhaps. "I've been thinking," Zanaka said, her voice calm but determined. "I've spent my life surrounded by power, by wealth. But you don't rely on any of that. You seem to live without needing to control anything around you. How do you do it?" Riley glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I don't need to control others to feel powerful. I just need to control myself. When everything else falls apart, that's the one thing I can always hold on to. My choices, my actions." Zanaka nodded slowly. "But what if you want more? What if you want to create something larger, something that can change the world?" Riley's eyes softened, and he seemed to think for a moment before answering. "The world changes in small ways, Zanaka. Every action we take, no matter how small, makes a difference. You don't have to control everything. You just have to be willing to take action, even when it feels impossible." Zanaka felt a wave of emotion she hadn't expected. She had always relied on her wealth and her power. She had never truly faced a challenge like Riley had. She had always been protected by her position, her resources, and the influence she held. But Riley, despite his loss, was a living example of something she had never understood before: true strength. "You're not what I expected, Riley," Zanaka said quietly, her voice betraying her thoughts. "Most people would have fallen apart. But you—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You seem more alive than anyone I've met." Riley chuckled, his tone light but sincere. "That's the thing about humans, Zanaka. We don't have the luxury of giving up. We just keep going. And the more we go, the stronger we become." Zanaka stared at him, her thoughts swirling. The way he spoke, the fire in his eyes, the way he carried himself despite everything he had lost, it was unlike anything she had ever experienced. For the first time in years, she felt a stirring deep within her, a feeling of awe, admiration, and something else, something that made her question everything she thought she knew about power. The days on Earth seemed to pass by in a blur for Zanaka. She had come to the planet expecting nothing more than a diplomatic visit, but now, each moment spent with Riley Thorne felt like a revelation. They continued to meet, sometimes in the grand halls of the gala, sometimes in quiet corners of the city. Wherever they were, Zanaka found herself intrigued by Riley, fascinated not only by his mind, but by something deeper. It was as though he had an energy that pulled her in, something she had never experienced before. Riley was unlike any being she had ever met. He was patient, kind, and never allowed his injury to define him. While others might have seen his floating platform as a crutch, Riley saw it as a tool, nothing more, nothing less. His words were always measured, thoughtful, and filled with a quiet confidence that made Zanaka want to listen, to learn. On the third evening of her stay, Zanaka invited Riley to dinner at her private estate. The moonlight bathed the courtyard in a soft glow, and the air smelled faintly of sweet flowers. They sat together at a table set for two, with dishes from both Earth and Varonis. As they ate, Zanaka couldn't help but notice the subtle way Riley observed the world around him. Always aware, always curious, always learning. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day," Zanaka began, setting down her glass of wine. "About how humans fight, no matter the odds." Riley raised an eyebrow, but remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "You make it sound so simple," she continued, her voice thoughtful. "That when life gives you something difficult, you just keep going. But I've seen so many others give up. I've seen entire civilizations crumble under the weight of adversity." Riley leaned back in his seat, his eyes locked onto hers. "That's the thing about humans. We don't have the luxury of giving up. When we face a challenge, we take a step forward, even if it's small. We do it because we believe that the next step will bring us closer to something better. And even when we fail, we learn from it and try again." Zanaka felt a strange tug in her chest. She had always relied on her power, her wealth, and her status. She had never truly struggled in the way Riley described. Yes, she had faced political challenges, but nothing compared to the personal battles Riley had fought. And yet, despite the odds against him, despite the loss of his legs, he was more alive than many beings she knew. "Why do you keep going?" Zenaka asked, her voice quieter now, filled with curiosity. "What drives you?" Riley looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening. "What drives me?" That's an easy question, but the answer isn't so simple. For me, it's not just about surviving. It's about making a difference. It's about showing that no matter what happens, I can still contribute. Even without legs, I still have a voice, a mind, and a purpose. And that's enough for me. Zenaka felt something stir deep within her. Riley's words were simple, but they held so much weight. She had always believed that power came from wealth, from influence, from control. But Riley's power came from something far more elusive, something intangible but far stronger than anything she had ever known. It was his spirit, his will to live, to learn, to grow, and to never stop fighting. "I don't understand," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "How can you be so strong? I've never met anyone like you." Riley smiled softly, his eyes twinkling with a hint of amusement. "Strength isn't about what's visible. It's about what's inside. It's the ability to keep moving forward, even when everything around you says you can't. It's the belief that no matter what happens, you can still make a difference." Zenaka didn't answer immediately. She wasn't sure how to put her feelings into words. Instead, she turned to face him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Riley, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how true strength comes from within. But how do I? How do I let go of all the things I've built? I've spent my whole life relying on control, on wealth, on power. And now, I don't know what to do with it." Riley studied her for a moment. "You don't have to let go of everything, Zenaka. You just need to understand that true strength doesn't come from holding everything together. It comes from knowing when to let go and when to trust others." Zenaka felt a tightness in her chest. But what if letting go means losing everything? What if I lose the empire I've built? Riley shook his head. "You won't lose it, but you'll change, and that's okay. Sometimes, the greatest strength is knowing when to change direction. The world around us is constantly changing. If you hold on to the past too tightly, you'll miss the future." Zenaka's thoughts swirled. She had always been a master of control. Letting go felt like a risk she wasn't sure she could take. And yet, Riley's words seemed so simple, so clear. He had faced the loss of his legs, something she couldn't even imagine. And yet, he had found a way to thrive. Why couldn't she find the same strength? Before she could say anything more, Riley added, "You've already made the first step. You've already started questioning. The hardest part is over. Now it's just about taking the next step, however small it might be." Zenaka felt a knot in her stomach. She wasn't used to uncertainty, and the idea of changing, of allowing herself to be vulnerable, was terrifying. But Riley was right. She had spent so much time in the past, in her empire, in the control she held over others. But what was that power worth if it didn't allow her to truly live? "Maybe I'm not ready yet," she said softly, her voice betraying her inner conflict. "Maybe I need more time." Riley gave her a knowing smile, as if he understood her struggle better than anyone else. "Take all the time you need, Zenaka. Change doesn't happen overnight. But the first step is to let go of the idea that you have to be perfect. No one is perfect." Zenaka met his gaze, feeling something stir inside her. Riley wasn't asking her to be perfect. He wasn't even asking her to have all the answers. He was simply asking her to trust herself. It was a small thing, but it was also the biggest thing she had ever been asked to do. Over the next few days, Zenaka began to make small changes. She started to delegate more responsibilities to her advisors, allowing them to take on some of the tasks that she had always handled herself. She found that she didn't have to control every detail to maintain her empire. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. One afternoon, as she was walking through her estate's lush gardens, She noticed Riley standing near the edge of a small pond, watching the water ripple gently in the breeze. She approached him, feeling a sense of calm settle over her. "You were right," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "It's not about holding on to everything. It's about trusting others, and trusting myself." Riley turned to her, a small smile on his face. "I'm glad you're starting to see that. True strength isn't about control. It's about knowing when to let go, and knowing that you're strong enough to survive without everything you thought you needed." Zenaka nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. She was starting to understand. She didn't need to control everything, to have power over everything. What she needed was the strength to change, to grow, and to trust the people around her. She could still lead with purpose, but she didn't have to do it alone. As she stood there, beside Riley, watching the water ripple in the pond, Zenaka realized that the future didn't look so uncertain after all. There was strength in letting go, and there was even more strength in learning to trust. And for the first time in a long time, Zenaka felt ready to face whatever came next. Zenaka stood in the heart of her private estate, looking out at the horizon as the sun dipped below the skyline. The city of Earth buzzed with activity, but Zenaka's thoughts were elsewhere. It had been weeks since she had started letting go of the weight she had carried for so long, the need to control everything around her, the pressure to always appear strong. And though it hadn't been easy, she could feel herself changing. There was still uncertainty, of course, but for the first time, she felt a spark of hope that change could be a good thing. Zenaka's brow furrowed as she processed his words. She had spent her entire life building an empire, a kingdom where she controlled every aspect of life. But now, as she stood there, she felt something shift. Riley had built his life not by controlling others, but by mastering himself. It was a lesson she had never learned. The conversation turned quieter as the night grew deeper. Zenaka sat on a bench beneath a tree, the soft light of the garden casting shadows around them. Riley hovered beside her, his platform making no sound. "Tell me, Riley," she said after a long pause, "how did you feel when you first lost your legs? When everything changed?" Riley's face softened, and for a moment, his gaze turned inward, as though he were remembering a past that still haunted him. "It was the hardest thing I've ever faced," he admitted. "I didn't know who I was without them. For a while, I felt lost. I wanted to give up. But then I realized something." Zenaka looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "I realized that my worth didn't come from what I had, but from who I was. And once I understood that, it didn't matter what I had lost. I could still be me. I could still make an impact." Zenaka stared at him, struck by the simplicity and depth of his words. She had always believed that power came from domination, from owning everything and everyone. But Riley had learned to find power from within himself. It wasn't about what he had lost. It was about what he still had. As the night grew colder, Zenaka stood up, walking toward the edge of the garden. The stars were bright in the sky, and for the first time in a long while, Zenaka felt at peace. She had spent so many years running from her true feelings, using her empire to protect herself from the world. But now, something had changed. She felt a connection to Riley, not just because of his strength, but because of his vulnerability. It was something she had never understood, but now she wanted to learn more. Riley followed her silently, hovering beside her as they stood under the stars. "You know," he said quietly, "you don't have to do everything alone. You don't have to be the one holding all the power. Sometimes, it's okay to let others in, to trust them." Zenaka turned to face him, her heart racing. She had never trusted anyone, not in the way Riley was asking. She had always been in control, always been the one others looked to. But Riley wasn't asking her to give up her power. He was asking her to let go of her fear, to trust that she could be strong without needing to control everything. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice soft, almost uncertain. Riley looked at her with kindness in his eyes. "You don't have to do it all at once, but every step you take will get you closer. And that's all that matters. Zenaka stood there for a long time, her thoughts swirling. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of her empire pressing down on her. But it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like an opportunity. An opportunity to change, to grow, to learn. And as she looked at Riley, his quiet strength, a constant presence beside her, Zenaka realized that perhaps the greatest power was not in what you controlled, but in the choices you made, and in the trust you placed in others. The next few days felt like a turning point for Zenaka. She had come to Earth with a clear mission, to strengthen her empire and build new alliances. But now, her goals were shifting. The lessons Riley was teaching her weren't just about survival or control. They were about understanding true strength, about finding power from within. Despite the quiet moments and the peaceful nights they spent talking, Zenaka couldn't help but feel a growing sense of doubt. How could she, a leader of an entire civilization, let go of everything she had built? She had spent years relying on her wealth, her influence, and her ability to control every aspect of her world. Riley's words, his simple, honest way of thinking, had cracked open something inside her, but the change wasn't easy. One evening, after an especially long day of meetings with her advisors, Zenaka found herself standing in the grand hall of her estate, staring out at the starry sky. The city was alive with lights, but she felt an emptiness deep inside. She had been so focused on building her empire that she had forgotten what it felt like to just be, to be herself without the weight of responsibility constantly on her shoulders. She heard the soft hum of Riley's levitating platform before he appeared beside her. He had a way of silently entering a room, always present but never overbearing. He glanced at her, reading her face with ease. "You seemed lost in thought," Riley said gently. Her meetings with Riley had become more frequent. She found herself looking forward to their talks, where they discussed everything from philosophy to the smallest details of everyday life. Riley's perspective was so different from anything she had known. He didn't see the world in terms of dominance or control. He saw it as a place of endless possibilities, where growth came from within. Today, Zenaka had invited him for another walk through the garden. As she approached, she saw him standing by the fountain, his expression thoughtful. His platform hovered beside him, as always, but there was something in his posture that made him seem less distant, more present. It was as if he had learned to live in harmony with his circumstances, rather than fight against them. "You've been quiet lately," Zenaka said, her voice soft as she stepped closer to him. Riley turned to face her, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Just thinking," he replied. "Sometimes silence is the best answer." Zenaka chuckled. "I've been learning that lately. Silence. Reflection." She paused, taking in the peaceful surroundings. "It's strange. For so long, I thought I had to be doing something, achieving something at all times. Now I realize that simply being present is an achievement in itself." Riley nodded, his gaze steady. "Exactly. Sometimes we get so caught up in chasing success, we forget to appreciate where we are right now. Life isn't always about moving forward at full speed. Sometimes it's about slowing down, reflecting, and being at peace with who we are in the moment." Zenaka smiled, feeling something warm stir within her. She had never really given herself the space to be at peace. But now, in Riley's presence, she felt a growing sense of calm. She was starting to accept that she didn't have to keep up a facade of perfection. It was okay to be vulnerable. It was okay to admit that she didn't have all the answers. As they walked through the garden, the conversation shifted. Zenaka spoke of the challenges she faced, the pressures of leading her people and maintaining her empire. Riley listened quietly, offering insights without judgment. "I've been thinking about my people," Zenaka said, her voice thoughtful. "The Veronis Empire is built on power, on wealth, on control. But what if that's not enough anymore? What if there's a better way?" Riley glanced at her, his expression one of curiosity. "What kind of better way are you thinking about?" "I don't know," she admitted, her shoulders heavy with the weight of uncertainty. but I can't keep doing things the same way. I've seen the cracks in the system. I've seen the way people are starting to lose faith. My empire is strong, but it's not enough to make people believe in it anymore. It's not enough to make them feel alive. Riley stopped walking and turned to face her. Maybe what you need isn't to change everything at once. Maybe it's about showing people a different way. A way that's about strength through unity, not dominance. A way that's built on trust, not control. Zenaka looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always believed that the strength of her empire came from her ability to control everything. But now she was beginning to see that true strength came from collaboration. From creating a space where people could thrive, not just survive. I've been so focused on keeping everything together, she said softly. But maybe the key to true strength is letting others share the burden. Riley smiled, his eyes reflecting understanding. Exactly. Leadership isn't about holding the weight alone. It's about lifting others up, helping them find their own strength. When you empower others, you create a community. And that's what will make your empire truly strong. Zenaka felt a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone in this. She didn't have to carry the weight of her empire by herself. If she could trust others, if she could let go of some of the control, she could build something better, something stronger. As they continued walking, Zenaka realized that she had been approaching leadership from the wrong angle. She had been trying to hold everything together, to be the perfect ruler. But perfection wasn't the goal. Connection was. That night, Zenaka sat alone in her study, deep in thought. She had a decision to make. The future of her empire, and her own future, lay before her, and for the first time, she felt truly uncertain. But it wasn't a fear-based uncertainty. It was the kind of uncertainty that came with new possibilities. She could continue down the path she had always known, holding onto control and power. But that path was already showing signs of weakness. Or she could take the risk, trust in her people, and begin to build something new. A society based on mutual respect, collaboration, and shared strength. Zenaka felt a surge of hope. Maybe she didn't have to choose between power and vulnerability. Maybe she could have both, if she learned how to balance them. The next morning, she called a meeting with her most trusted advisors. As they gathered around the table, Zenaka stood tall, a newfound strength in her voice. "I've been thinking," she began, looking each of them in the eye, "and I believe it's time for a change. We're going to build something different, something stronger, not through control, but through trust." Her advisors exchanged glances, but none of them spoke. Zenaka could see the doubt in their eyes, but she also saw something else, curiosity. They were ready for change. "I don't have all the answers," Zenaka continued, "but together we will find a new way. A way that doesn't rely on power alone, but on each other." She felt a sense of clarity and peace settle over her. This was her turning point. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to walk it. And this time, she wouldn't be walking alone. The days that followed Zenaka's decision were a blur of activity. She spent hours in meetings with her advisors, discussing the future of the Varonis Empire. But this time, there was a difference. Instead of commanding, instead of imposing her will, she listened. She asked questions. She allowed others to take the lead. It was harder than she had expected. The old habits were deeply ingrained, and there were moments when she wanted to step in, to take control again. But each time she resisted, she felt a new kind of strength. The kind of strength that came from trust. One afternoon, as Zenaka sat in the grand hall of her estate, she found herself reflecting on the changes she had made. The empire was still hers to lead, but the path she was now on was different. It wasn't about ruling with an iron fist. It was about guiding her people toward a common purpose, about building something that would last for generations, not through domination, but through unity. Riley had become a constant presence in her life. He was no longer just a companion, but a teacher. Through their conversations, she had learned more about herself than she ever thought possible. He had helped her see the value of vulnerability, of collaboration, and most importantly, of trusting others. As she sat lost in thought, the doors to the hall opened, and her chief advisor, Alan, entered. He looked more serious than usual, his brow furrowed with concern. "Zenaka," Alan began, his voice cautious, "there's something we need to discuss." Zenaka looked up from her desk, sensing the weight in his words. "What's happened?" "We've received reports from several of the outer colonies," Alan said. "There are unrest signals. Some factions are questioning your leadership. They're not sure about this new direction." Zenaka's heart sank. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but hearing it spoken aloud was different. The doubt was creeping in from all sides. "I expected as much," Zenaka said quietly, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Change is never easy. People don't like uncertainty, but it's the only way forward. We can't stay trapped in the past." Alan hesitated before continuing. "I understand, but there's more. Some factions are threatening rebellion if we don't return to the old ways. They want the control, the power, back in your hands." Zenaka felt a sharp pang in her chest. The empire she had built, the empire she had loved, was now testing her in ways she never imagined. She could feel the pressure, the weight of their expectations. But this time, it was different. She wasn't afraid. She was determined. "I knew there would be resistance," Zenaka said, her voice firm. "But this is a turning point. If they want to live in the past, they can. But I won't go back. The people deserve more than that. They deserve to have a voice." Ellen's eyes widened, clearly surprised by her confidence. "You're willing to risk it all. Your position, your empire." "I'm willing to risk everything," she said. "But I won't compromise who I am. If I want to create something lasting, something real, I have to lead with integrity. I have to show them that strength isn't in control. It's in trust. It's in unity." The room fell silent for a moment. Alan looked at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. "Then we will stand with you, Zenaka. But you must understand, the road ahead will be difficult. There will be those who will fight you at every step." Zenaka nodded. "I'm ready." Later that day, she called a meeting with the leaders of the outer colonies. The room was filled with stern faces, people who had lived their lives under the old ways, people who were not used to the idea of shared power. Zenaka stood at the head of the table, feeling the weight of their gaze on her. She had no illusion that they would accept her changes without question. But she was determined. This was her moment to prove that she had chosen the right path. "I know many of you are unhappy with the direction I've taken," she began, her voice calm but strong. "I know you are used to the old ways, to the certainty of control. But I'm here to tell you that those days are over. We are moving forward, together." The room was quiet, and for a moment, Zenaka wondered if they would turn on her. But then, to her surprise, one of the leaders, a woman named Lyra, spoke up. "You're right," Lyra said. "We've been living in the shadow of fear for too long. Perhaps it's time for something new." Zenaka's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a full agreement, but it was a start. "Thank you," Zenaka said, her voice steady. "I know this won't be easy, but I believe in all of you. I believe in the strength of our people. Together, we can build something that will last. A future where power doesn't mean control. It means trust. It means collaboration." One by one, the leaders nodded in agreement, though not all were fully convinced. But Zenaka could see the shift. The seeds of change had been planted. The future was no longer uncertain. It was full of possibility. After the meeting, Zenaka walked out onto the balcony of her estate, her thoughts still swirling. It had been a difficult day, but a necessary one. She had stood up for what she believed in, and she had taken the first steps toward building something better. Riley joined her, as he often did. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. "You did well," Riley said quietly, standing beside her. Zenaka smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. "It's just the beginning, Riley. The hard part is still ahead. But I'm not afraid anymore." Together, they watched the sun set over the city. Zenaka knew that no matter what happened, she had already won. She had taken the first step toward a future built on trust, and she was ready for whatever came next.